Welcome. And in this lesson, we're going to take a look at working with our identity and access management and getting started with our best practices as if we were on a brand new account. So this is something that you're going to want to do every time you start a brand new AWS account. So first, let's go ahead and select our identity and access management. One thing that you'll notice is that I'm actually logged in as my root user, which means I opened up the AWS login and used the default login page with my email address and password. Well, that's not best practice. What we need to do is we need to actually look at these security statuses here. We need to delete our root access keys if we have any that exist. We need to activate MFA, which is multi-factor authentication on our root account. What this does is this provides a third-party login tool. So when you try to log in with the username and password, Amazon Web Services will ask for a specific code. This code can be found through your mobile device or a keychain ordered from Amazon Web Services. This code changes, I think, around every 5 seconds. So if you have the right code, you're able to apply that third component to AWS in order to log in. So that's called multi-factor authentication. This way, if somebody has compromised your username and password, they still can't log in unless they have the multi-factor device. Then we need to make sure we create an individual IAM user. We need to create an administrative user for us to use. We need to not log in and be using AWS with our root account. That is against best practice. We can use groups to assign permissions rather than assigning individual permissions to users. And then we need to apply an IAM password policy, which says passwords need to have specific strength or passwords need to be changed after a specific time period. So we're not going to walk through activating the root device because you need to have your third-party device. You can download Google Authenticator on iOS or Android and click on Manage MFA. Ours would be a virtual MFA device. You would select Next Step. And you will follow these directions for setting it up. You would take a picture using Google Authentication here, and it would provide 2 access codes. With those 2 access codes, it syncs your authentication app to your AWS Web Services account, and then you select Activate Virtual MFA. So you can go ahead and set up the multi-factor authentication in your system. We're going to leave it out for this lab video. Then we need to create our individual IAM users. I can either manage users here or come up on my left-hand side and select users. I'll go ahead and create a new user. I'm going to call this user admin. Now, do I want an API access key for each user? If I did, I could go ahead and just leave that checked and then select create. From here, you'll see that we have access keys. These access keys are available only one time. AWS will not regenerate the same access keys. Once they are downloaded and we are past this screen, the only way to get access keys again, unless you already have them, would be to regenerate them and get new ones. So we could download our credentials and then select close. So I now have my user. If I click on my user, I'm brought to a brand new interface here. What we have is the user ARN. Every single resource on Amazon Web Services has what's called an Amazon resource name, ARN. What we have is we see the namespace. It's an Amazon resource name in the AWS environment. It's our IAM service and my AWS account ID. Then my user and admin. That's how AWS knows what admin user you're talking to. So if you have an admin user, it's unique to your account because it's inside of our account ID. Now, we can see a little bit of information about our user. We can see if our user belongs to any groups, and right now he doesn't currently belong to any groups, and we don't have any permissions. So it's best practice to try to have a group and manage permissions on groups if you can. So if we go to our groups and we create a new group, I'm going to call this admins. This is our administrative group. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide administrative access. Well, my question is do you want your administrative users to have the ability to manage users, or do you only want one person to have the ability to manage users? So let's take a look at how we can apply multiple policies in a way that really makes for easy management. So I don't necessarily want every single administrative user to be an admin. I only want the single admin user to have full 100% administrative privileges. Now, if you recall, administrative access allows the person who has this policy attached to it to create users and groups. So since I don't want that for any user that belongs to the admin group, I'm going to select Power User Access. And then I'll select Next Step and then Create Group. Well, this creates somewhat of a problem. I'm going to go ahead and add my user to the administrative group that we've just created. However, this user doesn't have the ability to manage users and groups. And I want my user that is username admin to have that ability. I don't want any other user to have that belongs in the admin group. And we could have created another group called Power Users if we wanted. I'm trying to demonstrate how we can actually apply multiple policies to a user. So not only does the policy that is attached, our power user policy, not only does this policy apply to the user who belongs to this group, but you can also apply multiple policies to the user. The user can belong to multiple groups, and AWS will look at all of the policies that make up that user's account, whatever groups that user belongs to. Now, this is where it's important to remember that an explicit deny always overrides an allow. It's also important to remember that by default, a user has deny permissions, regular deny permissions, not an explicit, but regular deny permissions. So if I go into my user now and I say, I want this user to have the ability to manage user and group accounts, then I want to attach another policy to just this user. And I'm going to attach the administrative access policy, and then we'll select attach policy. So now this user also belongs to the power user access and administrative access. Now, it's probably a little much. Again, I'm trying to demonstrate that you can apply multiple policies to a user. So let's take a look at what this policy looks like. It's really simple. Because we're allowing access to absolutely everything on AWS, the effect is allow. The action is a universal asterisk. It means everything. It's a wildcard. So every available action on every available resource. Amazon S3, Amazon EC2, Amazon SNS, any region, any availability zone. So it's a very simple policy here. So if we go down to policies, we can look at our managed policies. We have pre-built policies already available to us. Amazon Elastic MapReduce, full access. So now that I've created my administrative user, let's go ahead and click on the user again and go down and look at the sign-in credentials. I need to set a username and password. So I'm going to manage a password, assign a custom password. I'm going to enter in a custom password. And I can require the user to change password at next sign-on, or I can just apply the changes. Now, look at the other items that are available. We can manage PEM keys that are associated with this user. We can also force multi-factor authentication, which means not only is multi-factor authentication enabled on the root device, I can say that all users need to have multi-factor authentication enabled in order to log in. So next, let's go down here to account settings. Under account settings, we have our password policy. We can say, well, we want the minimum password to be 7 characters long. We want to require at least one uppercase letter, a lowercase letter, and we want to enable password expiration. We want to expire passwords every 30 days. This allows us to have enterprise level password policy. So we can apply this password policy and it will apply to every single user that has an account inside of our IAM. So a little bit about security token service regions. This is primarily covered actually in our AWS certified developer course. But what the token service does is it allows us to create temporary credentials. For example, let's say that you have a mobile application. This mobile application stores data for the user who's using the mobile application inside of DynamoDB. Well, how does that mobile application have permission to communicate with DynamoDB? We know it's against best practice to store API credentials in the code. That would be horrible, horrible best practice if we were going to distribute that out to every single mobile device that installs our application. So how do we do that? Well, the security token service allows us to use something like Google authentication, Amazon authentication, something with single sign-on, such as Facebook. And it allows us to communicate with AWS to get a temporary credential. That temporary credential assumes a role that has specific permissions, such as write permissions to DynamoDB. Then it assumes that a role, it executes the code, then the security token expires the token, and that device no longer has access until the next time it requests it. So again, that goes into more deep detail in the AWS Certified Developer course. So let's go back to our dashboard and see where we are. We've completed all of our setup, and again, you should have completed your Activate MFA on your root account. Best practice, something that we need to be completely aware of. So now that we have this, how do we log in to our Amazon Web Services account? Well, we have our IAM user sign-in link. If I copy this and open it up in a browser window, I can log in with my admin user and the username and password that I created to sign in with. Make sure I'm using the right password. And I'm now working as the admin user. The admin user has the same privileges as the root user, except for I'm now using best practice. Now, one thing to know is if we go down to billing and cost management, we don't actually have it authorized so that an IAM user can manage our billing. So that might be something that we want to enable on our root account. So I'll have to re-log in as my root account. It logged me in as my admin user, so I'll want to sign out. And I'll sign back in as my root user. In order to do that, I'm going to click on sign in using root account credentials. So now that we're back in, let's go under billing and cost management. So inside of our billing and account preferences, let's browse down to account settings, browse down to IAM user access to billing. We'll select edit and we'll activate IAM access. Now you don't have to do this, but let's say that we have an accounting department that needs to have read permissions to our billing. We don't want to give them access to the root account. We want to keep that as protected as possible. So we could create an IAM credential with read only, and they can access the account billing information. So now if we come back and log back into our given URL, custom URL, can log in as our admin user, head over to our billing and cost management, and now we have access. So that concludes it for this lesson. Go ahead and complete this lesson.